Hello guys, this is Dark Fox Sage 2 and we are back with our new fanfic, which is What If Naruto Was Raised to Restore a Fallen Clan with Haku Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic, then please press the like button and please subscribe to the channel. It motivates me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. Now let's start the fanfiction. An eagle soared overhead, its harsh cry echoing over the land. The raging yellow sun looked to be cooking the rocky mountain below, a hot sizzling sound coming from many of the rocks and outcrops. If one was to look carefully, they would be able to make out a wooden structure atop the mountain. Grasshoppers chirped and insects buzzed around. The cold-blooded animals like snakes and lizards were out on the hot rocks enjoying the heatwave. A figure, barely discernible to any ordinary human due to the haze of heat in the air, flew up from a part of the mountain that had plateaued. He landed on one of the first outcrops in a series that wound up the mountain. Kenji huffed, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Rolling his shoulder, the man shifted his backpack into a more comfortable position before he focused chakra through his feet. Using the sudden force, Kenji seemed to almost fly up from his small chunk of sizzling rock to another, slightly larger one. A hissing sound drew his attention, and he looked down to find a rather large lizard trying to run away. Kenji had accidentally landed on its tail. Picking up his foot just enough for the reptile to get free, he watched as it scurried off towards the edge of the outcrop. Not a second later, the eagle from before swooped down and caught the critter between its talons, its wings beating heavily to push away from the ground. Kenji shook his head and watched the beautiful creature fly away, the unlucky lizard wriggling in its grasp. He glanced up at the sun, trying to discern the time. It was nearing midday, and he still had half a mountain to climb. Why the hell did he have to set up camp on top of this mountain, of all possible places? Naruto stared at the wooden door. He had been avoiding going in there for almost 2 weeks now, but today he was finally going to find out what was behind it. Shigeru and Kaide, Shigeru's granddaughter, were out visiting the Ichirakus. Examining the lock for a moment, Naruto found the corresponding key on his keychain and unlocked the door. Seals lit up, similar to the ones that covered the outside of the house, before fading away a minute later. The door creaked as it opened, giving the darkness beyond an even more eerie feeling to it. Naruto stepped forward into the darkness, and found it was a set of stairs that led down into what he assumed was a basement. As he walked, torches lit up along either side of the staircase, barely their seals grafted into the edges of them. Naruto recognized part of one as a sensory seal, and figured there must also be a fire generation seal somewhere as well. Once the sensory seal picked up someone's presence, the torches must light up, and die out once the person left the sensory seal's range. That's pretty clever. Creepy as hell, but clever, thought Naruto. He finally reached the end of the stairs, and judging from the lack of windows guessed he was now underground. He took a step into the new room and immediately the place lit up, not with torches but with strange seals that Naruto didn't recognize. They emitted as much light as a standard electric light, and revealed the contents of the room. Scattered along the walls were shelves, filled to the brim with scrolls and books of all kinds. There were locked cupboards, scrolls thicker than both of Naruto's legs together, and paintings spread throughout the room as well. Standing in the middle of the room was a podium, a thick book sitting atop it. Ahead of the podium, against the furthest wall, was a kind of stand that held a formal black kimono, white obi and a haori, a formal jacket worn with a kimono. The haori had the namikaze mon, crest, emblazoned on either side of the breast. The mirror behind the stand revealed a larger version of the crest on the back of the jacket as well. Stepping up to the podium, Naruto's hand reached out for the book on instinct. His fingers traced the bronze crest in the middle of the hard cover. Opening the book, the first page had no fancy decorations or paintings, but beautiful calligraphy writing. Tales of the Creed, History of the Namikaze. Naruto stared at the words. This was his clan's history, and this basement must have been the clan archives. He turned the page, surprised at the condition of the book. He didn't even know what the material was, some kind of paper maybe, but it wasn't the paper used by those days standard. Naruto took the book down from the podium and sat on the ground, his legs folded under him. He was going to read this, even if it took him all week. In an age of war, chaos and destruction, ninja were the tools of daimyos, selling their skills to the highest bidder. Clans existed, not of families, but of ninja with similar skills. Eventually, these ninja turned into the families that are known as clans today. We, the Namikaze, were no different, having no relation by blood whatsoever. However, we were unique in how we formed the clan. None of our skills were the same, and we all came from different parts of the land. We were all lone ninja, all extremely skilled, and we were some of the richest known through the land. Each one of us was hired by a daimyo that controlled a series of islands off the east coast. Our mission was simple: take over the mainland directly opposite the islands. It was in a tsunami of blood that the clan was born. We slaughtered hundreds of innocent people that, to this day, still haunt my dreams. It was the fact the daimyo had an entire army of soldiers waiting to kill us once we returned that we took over the islands, now known as the Land of Waves. We piled the bodies of the soldiers we killed that night on a hillside, their daimyo atop it, and burnt the remains. We became the leaders of Wave, and we took on a creed. We would become an undefeatable clan, one that specialized in all aspects of combat. However, we were like the ocean. Calm, benevolent almost for the majority of the time, but when stirred we took no prisoners, and destroyed everything in our path. We took the title of Namikaze, of Waves and Wind, due to our position as leaders of Wave, and the fact that all of us held the natural ability to manipulate the element of wind. Namikaze Genosuke, head of the Namikaze Naruto, was fascinated by his clan's history. What surprised him though was how the book was written. He had seen the Sarutobi family scroll, and it was all written by one person in the third person. However, this was more like a journal, and each new passage was written by a different person. Naruto quickly became immersed in the book, and would be sitting in the archives for a while yet. Kakashi frowned. He was having a hell of a day. First, he was late for a meeting with the Hokage, and not because he was at the memorial stone, but because he was up all night reading and overslept. And then, after finding out his future team, he went to check up on them. Sasuke was the easiest. The boy was just training in the forest that edged the Uchiha sector. He was beaten half to death following Sakura, when he was accidentally caught watching the female side of the hot springs from a tree. At least he got some valuable information from both trips. The first was that Sasuke was obsessed with power, specifically to kill his brother, and would be willing to go to any lengths to get it. The boy also talked to himself when he thought no one was around, not exactly stable in Kakashi's book. And Sakura was more focused on how she looked than her training. At least Sasuke wasn't a liability in a fight, but Sakura would be nothing but dead weight. She had spent the entire day before going to the bathhouse either searching for Sasuke or looking at some new fad diet in the local chemist. And now, to add more onto his plate, he couldn't find his third soon-to-be student, Uzumaki Naruto, anywhere. He had searched the restaurants, training grounds and shinobi stores all around Konoha and found neither head nor tail of the blonde. He had searched the Namikaze grounds and still not found the boy. The only place he hadn't searched was the Namikaze compound itself, and that was because he didn't have a key. He knew from experience what the seals surrounding that house did, and quite frankly he didn't want to be fried to a crisp anytime soon. So yeah, Kakashi was having a bad day. He knew that it was getting late, and he would be expected at the Junin Long soon. It was his shout tonight after losing a bet to Guy. He started towards the trees when he heard the sound of a door sliding open. Looking around, he saw his missing genin and sighed in annoyance. Just when he decided to leave, the boy shows up. Annoying brat. The silver-haired Junin disappeared into the trees, taking care not to leave any sign of his presence behind. This kid had been trained by Kenji, so it wouldn't surprise him if he had above-average skills. He watched with interest as the blonde walked to a grassy clearing just off from the clearing the house was in. He was carrying a ninjutsu in his left hand and a scroll in the other. Training? Kakashi mentally questioned. Kakashi watched for at least an hour, mesmerized by how Naruto trained. First, he summoned one shadow clone, which took exactly half the boy's chakra, and then they sparred. There was no fancy footwork, no flashy or graceful moves. Everything he did was effective, brutally so, and economic. He wasted no energy. He never overextended. He used rather odd techniques that, while seemingly ridiculous at first, were vicious when carried through. This fighting style was reminiscent of Kenji's, but at the same time completely different. Kenji used a katana, his footwork was graceful and he delivered powerful attacks that conserved his energy. However, both father and adopted son used the same techniques, just slightly modified for the shorter ninjutsu, and both could absolutely decimate an enemy. It was amazing that a child no older than 13 could wield a sword to such an extent. His single eye glanced up towards the sky and he almost swore. He was going to be late to the bar. Oh well, not like they weren't used to it. Looking one more time at Naruto, he smiled in anticipation. He couldn't wait until the end of the week. Blue eyes were locked with brown, sparks flying between the pair. Nostrils flared and steam seemed to fly from them, the motion repeated by the counterpart. One stomp, then another, and the blue eyes finally turned skyward as their own screamed in frustration. Fine. All right already. I'll show you the technique, sheesh. The little brown-eyed boy smirked in triumph, his arms folding across his chest and his nose turning up toward the clouds. Naruto's eyebrow twitched and he promptly rapped his knuckles across the boy's head. Don't act all high and might, Konohamaru. I'm only teaching you because I will be an official ninja tomorrow, so I won't be able to use this technique as much. Konohamaru pouted for a moment but perked up when Naruto started to walk away, waving his hand over his shoulder for the honorable grandson to follow. The pair walked along the streets of Konoha, Naruto pointing out the beautiful women and how they looked. He snuck Konohamaru into the adult section of the magazine store, and showed him the swimsuit models and the latest edition of Kunoichi Weekly, which showed the latest in Kunoichi fashion, all of their models deadly beautiful. After their attempt to sneak into the hot springs for the final bit of research, actual naked women, Naruto had been beaten to the point where he could barely walk. After that incident, Naruto decided they had researched enough and he took off for one of the less used training grounds, which doubled as a park on certain days of the week. Thankfully, today was not one of those days and the two boys had the entire grounds to themselves. He had promised Sarutobi that he would look after Konohamaru for a little while today, since Ebisu and Asuma were out on missions and not due back until that night. The kid's parents had died when he was young, maybe a year old. Thankfully, he didn't remember it all that well, and still had his uncle and grandfather to look after him. Naruto stopped reminiscing and turned to face the annoying situation at hand. The damn brat had pestered Naruto to teach him the jutsu he had used on Sarutobi a few days ago when he wanted to share lunch with the old man. The blood loss had made him woozy and agreeable to whatever Naruto suggested. Naruto got a free meal, and the Hokage ended up with an empty wallet. Right then, Naruto stated, "This is my original technique. Treat it with as much respect as you would your own. Watch carefully now." Naruto's fingers nimbly ran through the seals for his jutsu. Finishing on the ram, he smirked at Konohamaru before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. In his place was a naked, voluptuous, curvy blonde with long slender legs and a set of D-sized breasts. Her finger was against her lip, biting her fingernail in a rather adorable manner. Konohamaru nodded, taking in the details of the jutsu with many choruses. Oh. And, I see. The transformation dropped, revealing the fully equipped Naruto. Ever since the surprise test at the academy, he had taken to carrying his ninjutsu or scroll-sealed katana and broadsword with him at all times. A proud smile on his face, he declared the name of his technique. Uzumaki Prank Art Number 1. Sexy Technique. Konohamaru nodded, his eyes burning with determination. My turn, my turn. The boy made the seals necessary for the transformation. A cloud of smoke later, an obese brunette was winking towards Naruto. Shuddering, the blonde shook his head and told the boy to try again. The second attempt wasn't any better and Naruto mentally whimpered. This was going to be a long day. Old man, old man. Sarutobi sighed and looked up from his calligraphy. He was thankful that Naruto could distract Konohamaru for a few hours, but it was his fate to suffer the assassination attempts of his grandson. Turning around on his cushion, he took a long draw on his pipe and prepared himself to get up and help his grandson, who would inevitably trip on his scarf. Again. Konohamaru burst through the sliding doors and smirked, raising his hands that were held in the ram seal. Sarutobi's eyes narrowed. Jutsu. No, not that one. Uzumaki Prank Art Number 1. Sexy Technique. Konohamaru version. A seductive young brunette took a few steps towards the sandame, her breasts jiggling with each step. Sarutobi's eyebrow twitched once, twice, thrice, and a torrent of blood poured from his nose, sending the old man crashing into his calligraphy. The technique fell away from Konohamaru, who was holding his arm out, his fingers held in a V for victory. Elsewhere, Naruto felt a cold chill run down his spine and he immediately regretted teaching Konohamaru that jutsu. Iruka walked into the academy, a wide grin on his face and more relaxed than he had been all year. For the last 2 weeks, he had been relaxing in a resort a few miles from Konoha, famed for its hot springs' ability to heal the body and the soul. After 2 weeks of soaking, reading his favorite books and just overall enjoying himself, he was once again ready to face his duty as a sensei one last time before being reassigned while the academy was out. He walked through the empty halls, remembering the times with his class from their first year through to now. He approached the classroom and smiled, he could hear them through the walls. Only a third of the original class had passed the test, and now they would be split into their teams to begin their career as ninja of Konoha. Sliding the open door, he was shocked that he immediately had their attention. Normally it took at least 5 minutes of shouting to get them to settle down. He saw them all smiling proudly, their forehead protectors gleaming in the sunlight that shone through the large window. Most were wearing the strips of cloth and metal around their forehead, but some had them around their arms and necks. A few even used them as belts. Shaking his head with a small grin, he made his way over to the podium and glanced down at the roster he had carried in with him. All right then, I won't go over how proud I am of you. I gave you that speech 2 weeks ago. Today, you will be separated into 3-man cells and assigned to a Junin sensei. Now then, Team 1 is. Iruka continued through the list until he finally reached the last 3 teams. Uzumaki Naruto, Haruno Sakura and Uchiha Sasuke will make up Team 7. Your Junin sensei is Hatake Kakashi. Naruto bowed his head in acceptance. It was an odd setup, but he was used to being unpredictable. It was one of his finer traits. Sasuke looked as nonchalant as ever, as if the news meant absolutely nothing to him. Only Naruto and Iruka noticed the slight upturned corner of his lips. Sakura was screaming with delight, chanting something about love conquers all, and Ino was screaming that she would kill Sakura. Team 8 will be Hyuga Hinata, Inuzuka Kiba and Aburame Shino. Your sensei is Yuhi Kurenai. Team 9 is still in circulation from last year. Team 10 will be Akamichi Choji, Nara Shikamaru and Yamanaka Ino, under Sarutobi Asuma. Naruto looked up at that. He didn't know Asuma was going to be one of this year's sensei. He suddenly felt very sorry for Team 10. Asuma was one of the laziest people he knew, but he always showed up on time. Not a minute after that thought, Asuma walked through the door with a black-haired woman with crimson-colored eyes. Naruto immediately placed her as Yuhi Kurenai. One by one, the teams were taken away until there was no one left in the room except for Team 7. Naruto clicked his tongue in annoyance, and decided to flex his prankster muscle a bit. Whoever Hatake Kakashi was, he was going to cop it when he got here. Sakura watched with barely veiled enthusiasm and Sasuke looked on with mild interest as Naruto went back and forth between the storeroom and the classroom. Naruto's prank started out simple, but gradually got more and more complex to the point where even Sasuke was impressed with it. Now all they had to do was sit and wait. Kakashi slid open the door to the classroom, figuring he had made his team wait long enough. Immediately, his danger sense kicked in, but he ignored it in favor of looking at his team. Sasuke was sitting off to the far side of the room, staring through the window with that brooding look of his. Sakura was trying to get Sasuke to go on a date with her, with little success. And Naruto was sitting atop the desk in the back corner of the room, running a whetstone along the blade of his sword. He took a step into the room and went to speak, when his danger sense started to scream at him. He noticed a sliver of light reflect off something attached to Naruto's sword, before it disappeared with a twang. A bucket, filled with pink paint, dropped onto the Junin's head. Sasuke yanked a cord, and several pillows shattered over him, covering him in down. If that wasn't enough, a duster came flying at him from the blackboard and smacked into the side of his head, causing Kakashi to look around and see a second Naruto flipping a second duster in his hand. Kakashi glared at all three of his students, ignoring the clone with the duster. My first impression is, I hate you. Get up to the roof. The Junin disappeared in a swirl of leaves, heading towards his apartment. He would get changed and then join his team once again. Right then, said a newly showered Kakashi, since we are going to be a team, how about we introduce ourselves, Kakashi-sensei, how do you want us to do that? Sakura asked, her hand slightly raised. Kakashi's eye curved upward into a weird kind of upside down V. Tell us your name, likes, dislikes, dreams for the future, hobbies, things like that. And you don't need to raise your hand, you aren't a student anymore. Sakura giggled nervously and put her hand back down. Why don't you go first, sensei? Give us something to go off. Kakashi blinked once, before shrugging in an, I guess so, kind of manner. Well, I'm Hatake Kakashi. Things I like and things I hate, guess I don't feel like telling you that. My dreams for the future, never really taken the time to think about it. As for my hobbies, well, I have lots of hobbies. Sakura's eyebrow twitched. That told them nothing aside from his name, which they already knew. Naruto shook his head in a kind of amusement, causing Kakashi to do that eye smile thing of his and look across at the blonde. Okay. You can go first, Blondie. Naruto shrugged and nodded. Okay. Well, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I like ramen, swords, family and training. I dislike people who treat family and loved ones as trash, and people who don't appreciate the value of hard work. My hobbies. Collecting antique swords, gardening and finding new jutsu to use in conjunction with my sword. Dreams for the future. Not sure really. Make my parents and loved ones proud, I guess. Kakashi nodded, kind of glad he had at least one normal person on his team, even if he did have a demon sealed in his gut. Turning to Sakura, he waited patiently for her to start. When he realized she was too busy staring at Sasuke, he sighed and cleared his throat. Pinky, your turn. Sakura tore her star-struck eyes from Sasuke and glared at Kakashi for a second before speaking. I'm Haruno Sakura. I like, giggle. I hate Ino Pig. I like memorizing facts and collecting things. Her eyes trailed to Sasuke for a minute. In the future I want to marry. Another round of giggling ensued. Kakashi and Naruto sighed in unison. They had both seen how well she performed during the fake attack on the academy, utilizing the basics to their fullest extent, but now she was just some annoying fangirl. How could someone's personality change so quickly? Okay. Brooder, you're up. Sasuke turned his glare onto Kakashi, having no effect whatsoever. My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I don't like much and I dislike a lot. My hobby is training. My dream, no, more of an ambition is to kill a certain man and rebuild my clan. Kakashi nodded. It was obvious to him who Sasuke was talking about, but Naruto looked confused and Sakura was once again staring at Sasuke with nothing but adoration in her eyes. The Junin wondered how long it would take to snap her out of her fangirl phase, and hoped that he could manage it before the team started to go on more serious missions outside the village. Well then, meet me tomorrow morning at Training Ground 7, 5 a.m., for a survival exam. Sakura's head snapped around to face her sensei. But, we already did survival training in the academy, Kakashi-sensei. Kakashi's eye smile turned almost sinister. Not this survival exam, you haven't. If you fail this, you fail as a genin. You will be sent back to the academy. Make sure you come prepared. Oh, and don't eat breakfast, you'll just puke. Sakura's harsh shriek of, "What?" signified Kakashi's cue to exit. Naruto looked at where Kakashi was standing a moment ago, his eyes slightly wider than normal. That Shunshin technique was fast. Way faster than his own was. Turning to his new team, Naruto figured he may as well try to get to know them better than he did. After all, he had only met them just shy of a month ago. Sakura, Sasuke, do you want to go grab something to eat? Sasuke grunted and walked away, Sakura following him, crying about a date. Naruto sighed and hung his head. So much for that idea. Maybe he could go hang out with Shikamaru and Choji, they were bound to need comfort food after being stuck with Ino. Kenji drank deeply from the tea that had been offered to him. He had to leave today, it had taken him a week to convince him to come down from his mountain. The sun was hidden today, and the air was starting to cool in the changing months. He drained the cup dry and carefully placed it back onto the serving tray. The pottery was a work of art, he didn't want to break it by accident. So, how have you managed to get your clone to last so long? The black-haired youth across from him stared into Kenji's eyes for a minute, before shifting his collar down enough to reveal a tattoo over his heart. Kenji's eyes widened, he had only seen that seal once before, and the guy who wore it had gone insane. Not to worry, Kenji-senpai, the youth started, I worked out the errors in the seal. It works as it was originally intended, and no adverse side effects have been noted as of yet. Kenji shook his head in worry. But, splitting your soul like that, Itachi, you are insane. Itachi smiled softly, that theory is quite possibly correct. Sadness seemed to creep into Itachi's usually stoic eyes, and Kenji quickly changed the subject. So, I'll see you in a few months then. Itachi nodded as he stood up, taking his tea tray into his small kitchen. Coming back out, he handed a scroll to Kenji, who pocketed it without looking at it. He knew exactly what it was anyway. The sword master rolled his neck as he stood up, his knees cracking as they were flexed after hours of sitting in the one spot. He picked up his pack, stocked with scrolls of meat, rice and fruit, his camping gear and a few scrolls filled with nothing but bottles of water. Heaving it onto his back, he picked up his katana from the edge of the door and waved over his shoulder to Itachi before jumping down the mountainside. Later, kid, Itachi watched as his favorite mentor slid down the side of the mountain, his chakra forming a kind of platform under his feet. Looking across to the clear sky, he couldn't help but smile. It would be nice to get off this dreary mountain for a while and see how life had progressed in his few years away from it. 3 tired, hungry children dragged themselves into the clearing of Training Ground 7. 3 training logs sat ominously towards the edge of the clearing, a forest surrounding most of it and a river running across the back. Naruto grunted in greeting, getting a yawn in return from Sakura and nothing from Sasuke. With a sigh, he dumped his blue pack against a tree and sat down beside it, leaning against the tree in an attempt to get a little more shut-eye. The group sat around, Waiting for at least 3 hours before Kakashi finally showed up, a well-worn edition of Jiraiya's first book in his Ika Ika series, Ika Ika Paradise, in his hand. Sakura was immediately on her feet at the sight of their God-forbidden teacher. "You're late." Kakashi waved his free hand nonchalantly. Sorry. I saw a black cat on my way here and had to take the long way around." "Liar." Naruto shook his head, trying to free it of the ringing caused by Sakura's shrill screaming. He watched Kakashi walk over to the logs and place an alarm clock atop the middle one. He also placed 3 bento lunch boxes beside the alarm clock. The one-eyed Junin slowly turned to face his team, and one could almost see the sadistic smirk under that mask of his. He lifted up a pair of silver bells, and jingled them ominously. "The rules are simple. You need to get these bells before noon. Whoever doesn't get a bell will be tied to a log while the rest of us eat lunch and then be sent back to the academy." "But, Kakashi-sensei, there are only 2 bells," Sakura pointed out. "Which means only 2 of you will pass this exam." A fire seemed to light up in Sasuke's eyes, and Sakura started to worry for her chances of staying with Sasuke. She knew that if anyone on the team had a chance of getting those bells, it was Sasuke and Naruto, and most definitely not her. Naruto frowned, his eyebrows knitted in confusion. Kakashi smiled, and raised his hand. "You'll have to come at me with the intent to kill. Begin." Immediately, the 3 genin blurred out of the clearing. Kakashi gave them a moment before he searched for them with practiced ease. He had to nod approvingly. Sasuke and Sakura were hidden well for genin. Now, where was Naruto? Oh, there. In the exact spot he had been standing when the exam started. "You know, Naruto, ninja generally hide and strike from the shadows." Naruto smirked and folded his arms across his chest. "Screw that. I'm gonna take one of those bells right now." With that, Naruto charged forward, his fist cocked back as he ran. Kakashi sighed. It looked like he was wrong about his blonde student. Naruto got in range and went to throw his fist forward, which Kakashi moved to block, but suddenly changed tactics mid-attack. The blonde used the momentum from his swing, which was pulled short, to spin up into a heel kick aimed at Kakashi's neck. Said man quickly grabbed Naruto's ankle, only to find that the blonde had twisted in a rather strange manner and was aiming a punch at Kakashi's face. Kakashi pushed off from the genin and had to duck a barrage of punches and kicks that came from Naruto once again. Kakashi bobbed and weaved, all the while his book was in his off hand and he continued to read, although only just. He noticed Naruto beginning to slow down, and took advantage of the situation. His speed kicked into overdrive, and Kakashi appeared crouching behind the blonde. He made a tiger seal, and heard Sakura scream at Naruto to run. Konohagakure Hiden. Taijutsu no Ugi. Senin Garashi. Kakashi thrust his fingers forward and into Naruto's rear end, enhancing the dramatized poke with chakra to send the boy flying. As Naruto flew forward, he seemed to grin for a moment before bursting in a cloud of smoke, leaving Kakashi looking shocked. A shadow clone. Damn, kid is smart. Meanwhile, Naruto felt a sudden rush of chakra and adrenaline, and the memories of what had happened to his clone passed onto him. Naruto shuddered and covered his backside for a moment, before snapping out of it. He tugged the wires of his trap to make sure they were good and tight before turning and running from his spot. That should be all the traps done. Now he just had to find Sasuke and Sakura and convince them to work with him. When he found Sasuke and Sakura, he was kind of shocked. Sasuke was buried up to his neck underground, glaring at the unconscious form of Sakura, who was lying a few meters away. He landed next to Sasuke, making sure to keep it light and not the usual heavy thud. Leaning down, he smiled at Sasuke and held a finger up in front of his lips, signaling for the Uchiha to remain silent. "I have an idea, and I need both yours and Sakura's help. I know you want to get a bell for yourself, but let's face it, none of us can take on a Junin alone and expect to win. But if we team up, we may be able to distract him long enough to get the bells. Sasuke glared at Naruto, and started to state his refusal, when he found Naruto glaring back at him. Naruto hadn't ever gotten angry in his entire time at the academy, and whenever the pair sparred, Naruto remained focused but never angry when he lost. This look, it was almost as terrifying as his father's was, when he was still alive. With a grudging nod, he agreed to Naruto's help. Naruto took a kunai from his pouch and dug around Sasuke enough to let the boy wriggle his shoulders free of the hurt earth. The shorter of the boys then proceeded to grab the trapped one under the arms and tug, gradually pulling him free. The pair proceeded to wake up Sakura, who immediately agreed to help. Whether it was because Sasuke had already agreed or because she knew she had no chance by herself, Naruto wasn't sure. The blonde quickly explained his plan, and pointed out where his traps were prepared. He'd make clones to set off the traps at the right time, but ultimately it was up to Sakura to fulfill the hard part of the plan, that was actually getting the bells. Kakashi was sitting against a tree, reading his book. His team had been silent for a while now, and it was getting pretty close to midday as well. He had thought this team would be the one that finally broken his streak of failing genin teams, but apparently he had thought wrong. What a shame, each one of them had major potential as well. He flipped to the next page when he heard the high-pitched whistling associated with throwing weapons. He grinned and moved off his tree, which was impaled not a second later with a myriad of kunai and shuriken. He had to quickly dodge the blurred form of Sasuke, who was attacking with his usual aggression and grace. What surprised him was Naruto's presence dropping from above, sword unsheathed and coming down in an overhead swing. Kakashi pushed back off Sasuke, making sure the Uchiha boy was out of range of Naruto's swing, only to find another barrage of shuriken and kunai flying at him from both left and right. He had two options: keep retreating back, or use his own kunai to deflect the oncoming projectiles. He didn't have time to make the decision, Naruto and Sasuke made it for him. Sasuke had prepared to, once again, use his family's fireball technique, and Naruto had a rather large shuriken spinning so fast that it had blurred into a circle of gunmetal gray. Jumping back, he had to dodge another rain of kunai and shuriken, as well as avoid Naruto's giant shuriken. He used a quick replacement as Sasuke let loose with his fire jutsu. He appeared slightly off to the side of the boys and ready to knock out the two when he saw a pinkish-red blur shoot across in front of him, a part of the blur flashing silver. Surprised, he backpedaled away from Sakura when he noticed something in her hand, something that should have been attached to his belt. He looked down in horror to find not only the bells were gone, but his belt had also been slashed and his pants were starting to fall. How the hell had Sakura gotten so close without the girl's chakra alerting him to her presence? I smiled just as the alarm went off. Well, that was interesting. Meet back in the clearing. The group made their way back to the clearing. Kakashi lagged behind a bit to give a bit of first aid to his belt, which involved tying a bandage around the two split ends and hoping that it held long enough. He looked over him team, impressed with what they had achieved. However, there was still some time to screw with them a little. Okay, Sakura, you managed to get the bells. Which one of you will be going back to the academy? It's your choice. Sakura gulped and faced her two comrades. Both were far better ninja than her, and both deserved to be genin far more than she did. She loved Sasuke, but didn't she want to deny Naruto, the boy who had made getting the bells possible, the chance to advance in his career? She carefully handed one to Sasuke, before biting her lip and handing the other to Naruto, his eyes watering over with tears. All right then. In a matter of seconds, Sakura was tied to the log and Kakashi had placed the two bento on the ground in front of Sasuke and Naruto. You two are free to eat. Don't give Sakura any food, she failed after all. I need to go change this belt. Kakashi disappeared in a whirlwind of leaves, leaving the three preteens alone. Sasuke and Naruto opened their lunch and started to eat, occasionally throwing a side glance at Sakura. All of a sudden, Her stomach growled rather loudly, causing the girl to giggle nervously. I didn't eat breakfast, and with the diet I'm on I didn't eat much for dinner either. Naruto shook his head. What kind of kunoichi diets like that? Eating balanced food is much healthier. Sakura glared at Naruto. I don't want to get fat. Naruto arched an eyebrow, and lifted his shirt to show his thin, well-toned stomach. I eat like a horse. Do I look fat to you? The training we do as ninja keeps us in shape, and we need the energy from a balanced diet to do what we do. Sakura couldn't help but admire Naruto's flat stomach for a moment before shaking her head. She went to argue but found Naruto holding his chopsticks up to her mouth, a small amount of rice in his umeboshi, a pickled kind of apricot, held between them. Naruto grinned and motioned with his own mouth for her to open wide, which she did. Sakura loved umeboshi. They were one of her favorite foods. Naruto deposited the food in Sakura's mouth, and suddenly remembered the time Haku had fed him after he had drilled himself into the ground. He had been in bed for 3 days, on orders of his mother, and Haku had been tasked with looking after him. Naruto felt the blush creeping up his neck, and turned away to try and hide it. He didn't want Sakura to get some idea that he was thinking about her. Naruto watched as Sasuke offered his own food to Sakura as well and couldn't help but grin. Crack! Lightning shot down around the trio, making Sakura scream. Naruto and Sasuke jumped in surprise. Dark clouds had appeared in the sky, and Kakashi was standing in front of them with a murderous glare in his visible eye. You all! The trio gulped. Pass! Naruto blinked in surprise, Sasuke smirked in triumph and Sakura just said, huh. Kakashi smiled as he untied Sakura. One of the most important aspects of being a ninja is teamwork. Those who break the rules are scum, that's true, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. That is my number one rule. Sakura crawled over and sat in between Naruto and Sasuke. Naruto clapped the girl on the shoulder and grinned at her, whilst Sasuke nodded in acknowledgement. Kakashi sat down with his new team and passed the third bento across to Sakura, taking his own from his hip pouch. Eat up. Tomorrow Team 7 officially begins. Naruto sat atop the tiled roof of his house, staring lazily up at the clouds as they floated past. For the past few days, since Team 7 had become official, Kakashi had run them through basic teamwork drills in the morning and 2D ranked missions in the afternoon. Naruto wasn't sure what was worse, the D-rank missions that were more like chores or the fact that they seemed to do no real training whenever Kakashi was around. He looked to the kunai that was spinning just above his hand and sighed. After being taught the leaf spinning exercise, he had started to use kunai since they were heavier and therefore harder to spin. It still required control, but more force was needed as well. Ever since he mastered that and had moved on to tree climbing, he had done it whenever he was bored or annoyed. Stopping the exercise, he caught the kunai with care as it fell without the chakra to support it in the air. Slipping it into his holster, he carefully levered himself up onto his elbows to watch Kaide. The teenager was in her garden, tending to the plants she worked so hard on every day. It was hard to believe she was technically a servant to the Namikaze. She and Shigeru were more like extensions of the family, like a cousin and an uncle respectively. A loud ringing sounded from the house below, and Naruto couldn't help but sigh. That alarm signaled it was time to go and meet the rest of his team for the afternoon missions. If they had to catch that damn cat again, he was going to cut it into tiny little pieces and feed it to Akamaru. 3 blurs shot through the thick forest, barely disrupting the leaves that had fallen to the floor. The blurs stopped at 3 separate trees, turning into the visages of Team 7. Each one of them had a wireless receiver strapped around their neck and a bud in their ear. What's the distance to the target? 5 meters. I'm ready at any time. So am I. Same here. Okay. Go. Kakashi ordered via his radio. The 3 genin shot forward from their hiding places, Naruto reaching his mark first. The cat looked up just in time to see Naruto land on it. His arms wrapped around it just in time to stop it from clawing him to pieces like it had the first few times they had gone on this mission. Naruto's eyes caught Sasuke's and he subtly nodded towards Sakura. Sasuke nodded in return and said 2 words to Sakura. 2 meaningless words, and Sakura's attention was away from Naruto and the cat in an instant. Naruto grinned evilly, slipping a kunai from his holster and went to bring it down right between the cat's eyes when it was snatched from his grasp. Naruto, what the hell do you think you're doing? Screeched Sakura. Damn it, Sasuke, you were supposed to distract her, Naruto growled under his breath. Sasuke shrugged. I tried. Kakashi's voice came over the radio, asking if it was their target. Oh, it was definitely Tora, all right. There was no mistaking that damn sadistic cat from hell. The trio met up with their sensei at the edge of the forest and headed back towards the administration building. They'd turn the cat in and probably get another D-rank mission that would drive them insane. They handed the cat over the fire daimyo's wife, who proceeded to hug the cat to her chest rather tightly. Kakashi had to force back a chuckle at Naruto's quiet chant. Squeeze it tighter, squeeze it tighter, squeeze it tighter. The Hokage looked down at his scroll of D-rank missions and cleared his throat. Okay, Team 7, you have the options of babysitting an elder's grandson, going shopping in the neighboring village, or helping with a potato harvest. Naruto clucked his tongue in annoyance. He couldn't take it anymore. We've done 9 D-rank missions in 5 days, and each one of those missions have been nothing but chores. Give us a decent mission already. Naruto bit his tongue when he realized what he had just said. He should have known better than to shout at the Hokage, and they were only rookie genin. He was so going to get yelled at for his outburst. I agree, Sasuke thought. Sakura said nothing, mentally berating Naruto. However, her second self, who had a much looser tongue, was cheering for Naruto and booing the Hokage. Kakashi bopped Naruto on the head with the back of his hand, admonishing his student for his outburst. Although, he had to admit, he was expecting it sooner or later. Of his 3 students, Naruto was the closest to normal and was also more expressive with his emotions. Sasuke was like a blank slate, and Sakura would say whatever was necessary to get Sasuke to notice her. Iruka started to rant. You're just rookie genin. And fresh out of the academy too. You should be glad that you're even doing D-rank missions. Sarutobi went to lecture the blonde youth about how the village's ninja and mission ranking system worked, when he noticed that said boy was mumbling under his breath about what Shigeru would be preparing for dinner. A long draw of his pipe later, his eyes fell to the C-rank scroll for barely a moment. One particular mission seemed to almost leap off the page at him, and the elderly man nodded. Yes, this would give Naruto what he wanted, and sufficiently punish him at the same time. All right then, Sarutobi began. Iruka and Kakashi stared at the old man oddly, whilst Naruto wore a look of triumph and slight confusion. He didn't actually expect to get a C-rank mission. Since you seem so determined, I have the perfect mission in mind. It is a protection and escort style mission of a certain individual. I'll introduce him now. Sarutobi motioned for the Chunin manning the door to open it. In stepped a man who looked old, but at the same time young and fit. The slight blush across his cheeks, and the bottle in his hand, immediately alerted the people in the room that this guy was most likely drunk, or at the very least on his way there. What's this? They're just bunch of super brats. And the blonde one, he doesn't look like he can even swing that super sword of his. Naruto's eyebrow twitched, but he didn't otherwise indicate his desire to kill this man. In any case, I am the super expert bridge builder, Tazuna. I expect you to provide me with super protection until I get to my home and finish my bridge, even if it costs you your lives. Kakashi looked at the Hokage, whose smirk grew wider. He has already paid for a basic C-rank mission. You will all be paid upon its completion. This mission will likely take a week, possibly 2. I suggest you pack as such. Good luck. Kakashi ushered his students out of the room. Alright, go gather your gear. Make sure you pack appropriately for a 2-week mission. We'll meet at the gate in an hour, got that? After receiving a chorus of acceptance, he shooed the trio of genin from the building and went to explain the situation to Tazuna before he packed his own gear. Sakura was already there and waiting for the rest of the team when Naruto arrived. Naruto jumped onto the roof of the guardhouse and waved for Sakura to join him. The blonde started chatting amiably with Sakura while the pair waited for the rest of their team. The girl was intelligent and surprisingly friendly when Sasuke wasn't around. It seemed that her obsession with Sasuke was tied in with some other part of her personality, or at least that's what Naruto figured. He tried getting Sakura to talk about Sasuke, but whenever he even brought up his name, she would cut him off with a completely different branch of conversation. He chuckled politely at a joke Sakura told about her father, when he felt the incoming chakra signatures of Sasuke and Kakashi and the general presence of Tazuna. Hopping down from the roof of the guardhouse, he grinned at the pair within and thanked them for putting up with him on their roof before waving to the rest of his team. He received a wave in return from Kakashi, but as usual got nothing from Sasuke. The genin shrugged it off and waited for Kakashi to sign off the departure of the team before they headed out through the giant gate of Konoha. As the group started down the road, a pair of eyes surveyed them from the treetops. Well, this is an interesting development, isn't it, brother dearest? Indeed it is, brother. Do we continue as planned? Yes. I doubt we will be able to achieve our goal with that Junin around anyway. Prepare a note for him, we will slip it to him during the commotion. Of course, oh brother of mine. We are going to the land of waves, right? Are there any ninja there, sensei? Kakashi glanced across to Sakura, and fell into a monotone speech about the ninja world, how they often made up the military power of a country and backed up the daimyos. Because of the small size of Wave, the daimyo never saw the need for establishing a hidden village. Wave is primarily a trading country. They make alliances through trade with certain ninja villages, and they in turn provide vital military support to those villages when necessary, but most often during times of war. The group turned off the main highway and continued down the exact same yellow-colored dirt roads that sprawled all across the Land of Fire. Naruto shifted his backpack, his ninjutsu strapped to the left side of the pack instead of his across his back. He could feel something off in the air. It wasn't threatening, but it didn't feel like something he would go out of his way to find either. That's when he noticed it. Along the road, a puddle sat just off to the side. An innocent puddle, the sunlight shimmering along its surface, and Naruto was immediately alert. It hadn't rained in days. By the subtle shift of Kakashi's shoulders, his sensei had noticed it as well. Naruto slowly, and carefully, slipped his arm from the right side strap of his pack. The group walked ahead of the puddle when the chaos erupted. There was no time to react as two men, shrouded in the one dark cloak, shot up from the puddle. Their mouths and noses were covered in masks, and they each had a forehead protector covering their forehead, marked with the symbol for Kurigakure, the hidden mist. The second man jumped off the first's back, a shuriken chain attached to a heavy metal gauntlet on his left hand. An identical one, which held the other end of the chain, was on the right hand of the first. The chain wrapped around Kakashi, and the two men chanted together. One down. The chain was pulled taut, carving Kakashi to shreds. No blood flew, however, merely shreds of cloth and the Junin's body which fell to the ground with a heavy thump. The two men disappeared before the eyes of the genin team. Naruto felt something reach under his left hip pouch, and reach into his back pocket. The presence disappeared, with a drone of, 2 down. Naruto smirked. The chain flew up for a moment and Naruto threw himself forward, his right hand on the hilt of his sword and his backpack flying backwards. Right into the face of the first man. A shuriken buzzed before slamming into the chain, courtesy of Sasuke. The shuriken pushed the chain back against a tree, which was quickly nailed into place by a well-aimed kunai, again by Sasuke. The Uchiha landed on the pair of gauntlets, using them as a platform to hold whilst he kicked backwards into the faces of the mist ninja. Naruto spun his sword once as he dashed towards the two. The blade came up, glinting in the sun, aimed at the neck of the first man. Sasuke jumped away from the pair as the chain fell limp, being detached from the gauntlets. The pair quickly moved, the first narrowly avoiding a cross-cut from Naruto's sword. The blonde corkscrewed, attempting to make another slash, but was forced back by metal claws swiping at his face. Naruto felt the back of his open-heeled sandal get caught on a tree root and cursed. His eyes snapped around for a mere moment, but it was enough. The first's arm arced forward as the man pounced. Time seemed to slow as Naruto's eyes trailed back to his opponent. His sword arm reacted on instinct alone, his fingers nimbly twirling around the handle as his arm came up in front of him. The blade, now resting against Naruto's forearm, intercepted the claws just in time. Blue eyes narrowed as a vile-smelling liquid dripped from the claws onto his sword and Naruto pushed as hard as he could against the gauntlet, but his footing was already starting to give way. His eyes closed and Naruto focused his chakra, passing it into his sword for one of the few techniques he could use with a blade. However, the weight suddenly disappeared and sent Naruto tumbling forward, who had been pushing against the man. He looked up in time to see Kakashi clothesline the second man, who had gone on to attack Tazuna. Sakura was standing in front of the old man, a kunai firmly in her grasp, and Sasuke was standing in front of her, as if protecting her with his own body. The first, the one who was attacking Naruto, was unconscious and being held by the scruff of his neck by Kakashi. Naruto looked back to where Kakashi's remains should have been, and found a pile of shredded logs. To be able to use the replacement technique so quickly and without hand seals, it greatly impressed Naruto. Kakashi tied the pair of mist ninja to a tree with a length of ninja wire and proceeded to question Tazuna. They weren't after me, Tazuna. They were going after you. Explain, now. Kakashi's nonchalant attitude had been replaced by something that terrified even Naruto, who had faced the killing intent of a professional assassin. Tazuna whimpered and explained everything. How he was being targeted by Gato because he was the only hope Wave had of breaking free of the shipping magnate's iron grip. By the time he was finished, Naruto could have sworn Tazuna had tears in his eyes, but the man looked away too quickly for the blonde to be sure. Kakashi sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Of course the first C-rank mission his team was given would turn into AB rank. There was probably a Junin waiting for them now that the two Chunin, who Kakashi had identified as the Demon Brothers, had been defeated. Kakashi turned and looked at each of his students one by one. We really shouldn't continue this mission, but I'll leave it up to you guys. Will we continue on, or will we head back? Naruto fiddled with the handle of his sword. I want to keep going. I mean, if we have the skills to help an entire country, why shouldn't we? Sasuke nodded in agreement. This is our first true mission. We aren't turning back now just because it got a little dangerous. With Sasuke's approval, Sakura, who had been sitting on the fence, quickly showed her approval of continuing the mission as well. Kakashi sighed. He knew he shouldn't have made it a democracy. With a wave of his hands, he motioned his students forward and informed Tazuna they would continue the mission, but it was to be risen to B rank and an undisclosed amount of pay would be received when Wave was back on its feet. Naruto grinned at his sensei before grabbing his bag, slipping his sword back into its sheath. He made sure no one was looking and subtly reached into his back pocket. From it he took a piece of paper that one of the brothers must have left behind. We'll tell the boss you're in our part of town, no need to worry. Catch up with you later, little brother. Naruto grinned and shook his head. He stuffed the note into a sealed pocket of his bag and then hurried to catch up with his team. This mission was about to get fun. Naruto was starting to get sick of Sakura's constant questions about Wave Country. Sure, he was interested in the place as well, after all his clan originated from there, but for the love of all that is holy. They were supposed to be in enemy territory. He could see Sasuke's annoyance written clearly over the prodigy's face, and was trying to decide whether Kakashi was giggling because of his book or trying to drown out Sakura. When they finally reached the shore, which was lined with mangroves so deep it was impossible to actually see the path hidden behind them, Naruto was the first out of the boat with a sigh of relief. He hated being cramped up in a small space, probably because was stuck with 4 other guys and a girl that wouldn't shut up. Sorry Tazuna, but I can't afford to take you all the way to your house. It's not a problem, my friend. Go home safe. The rower pushed off from the hidden dock and rowed away down another set of inland rivers. Tazuna's face turned blank and he pointed in the direction of his house. The group set off again, everyone tense. Even Sakura had gone quiet, noticing the tension in the air. Every time Naruto's arm swung with his steps, his finger would brush against the ring of one of his kunai, the blonde knowing exactly what was coming soon. Naruto tensed and deftly threw a kunai into the underbrush of a nearby tree. Sakura started to scream at the blonde for trying to act cool, and pushed the bushes aside, revealing a snow-white rabbit. The matte black kunai was lodged in the tree just above its head, and Kakashi frowned. Naruto wouldn't throw a kunai with that much force for no reason. And that rabbit, it's the wrong color for this season. Which means it was bred indoors. Shit. Replacement technique. Everybody, get down now. Kakashi crouched, his left forearm and right hand keeping him on his feet so he could jump up at a moment's notice. Sakura dived left and Sasuke to the right, making sure Tazuna was under him as a form of protection. Naruto crouched just like Kakashi did, except only one hand was on the ground, the other free to move about. He shifted his pack so he had better access to his hip pouches. Outwardly, he looked just as shocked as everyone else at the huge sword flying overhead, which curved like a boomerang and embedded itself into a rather thick tree. Internally, he was grinning. If Zabuza was here, then Haku was as well. Flashback. Zabuza's knuckles rubbed against Naruto's skull, trying to burn away the blonde hair via friction. God damn it, sensei. Get the hell off me, you psychopath. Zabuza's shark-like teeth gleamed when he smiled. Just a going away present, brat. Now remember, if we ever meet in the field as enemies, we will fight. After all, I need to see how much you have progressed. After the first fight we will tell your team, whoever that may be, that you and I are friends. Then, I'll decide whether I want to help you or not, got it? Naruto frowned. Yeah. You've told me a million times now. Geez, I'm not stupid. TCH, that's debatable. Zabuza grinned at the stink eye he received from his blonde pupil. In any case, we'd better hit the road. Say bye, Haku. It will be the last time you see the precious little blondie for a while. End flashback. Naruto shuffled around through the assorted tools he kept stashed in his pouch, trying to find his 2 favorite scrolls. His fingers brushed one, and he traced the outline of the words written on it. With a grin, he pulled the scroll out to the point where the end of it was sticking out through the flap of his pouch and left it there. The team stood up and faced the giant sword, now with a man standing atop its extremely long handle, facing away from the team. The bottom half of his face was wrapped in bandages and his forehead protector was wrapped strangely around his head, the metal protector on the side of his head. He wore no shirt, only a belt that wrapped over his chest, around his neck and clipped up with the front again, which obviously held his giant sword when not in use. Baggy, striped pants covered his legs. His arms and shins had blue and white camouflage design warmers, reaching just above his elbows and just below his knees respectively. Kakashi stared at the man and mentally frowned. Well, if it isn't Karigakur's missing nin, Momochi Zabuza-kun. Zabuza twisted his head slightly so he could see over his shoulder. Sharingan Kakashi. Sorry but, the old coot is mine. Kakashi reached to his forehead protector, the one that always covered his left eye, and pulled it up until it was straight across his forehead. The eye underneath was crimson red, with 3 black tomos, a kind of swirl that looked like a comma, revolving around a black pupil. Naruto's eyes narrowed and Sasuke's widened. Both though the exact same word. Sharingan. Sakura, the only one who didn't know what the Sharingan was aside from Tazuna, asked the question. What's the Sharingan? Sasuke frowned as he explained. The Sharingan is a dujutsu, an eye technique, which is said to be able to read and defeat any form of nin, gen or taijutsu. But that isn't the only technique the Sharingan has. Zabuza chuckled darkly. Exactly. That's not all. What's even scarier is the fact that once your opponent has seen your techniques with the Sharingan, he can copy them. The missing nin chuckled a little more before he kept speaking. When I was still a part of the Hidden Mists assassin team, I kept a bingo book. It had information on you, Hatake. The man who has copied over 1,000 jutsu, copy ninja Kakashi. Zabuza turned on his sword, now facing the team. Sasuke was scowling at Kakashi, wondering exactly how this man got the Sharingan. It was supposed to be a rare trait within the Uchiha clan, but this Junin was obviously not an Uchiha. Naruto flicked a second kunai from his pouch and held it in a reverse grip. He would have to wait his turn to fight Zabuza, it seemed. Let's end all this talking, Zabuza said. He crouched atop the sword and grabbed the handle with his left hand. I still have to kill the old coot, after all. Immediately the team formed up, the 3 genin taking up position in front of their client, Sakura to the left, Naruto on the right and Sasuke in front. Kakashi was standing just ahead of his team, eyes narrowed and glaring at Zabuza. Zabuza kicked off from the tree, tearing his sword from the trunk and taking it with him. The tall man blurred out of sight until he landed atop the lake, kicking up a single wave that rolled out from his spot in all direction. The giant sword was slung over his back and his arms were held in an odd position. His left was straight up in the air, and his right was bent horizontal so his hand was in front of his face. Both hands were held in a half-ram seal. The ninja was releasing enough chakra to constantly whip up waves from his place atop the water, 1 or 2 strands occasionally snaking their way around his legs. A leaf fluttered in front of his face, and Kakashi's eyes widened slightly when he realized the man was about to use a jutsu. Ninpu. Zabuza drawled. A thick fog rolled in from nowhere, obscuring half of Zabuza from sight. Kurigakure no jutsu. The fog thickened and Zabuza disappeared completely, Sakura screaming what everyone else could, or in this case couldn't, see. Kakashi's Sharingan searched for any source of chakra that belonged to Zabuza, but the fog was so thick with it that he couldn't pick up anything. This was bad. He'll go after me first. When Momochi Zabuza was still a part of Kiri's assassin team, he was revered as a master of silent killing. Sakura took in her surroundings. A few moments ago she could see the thick trees, even with the mist, but now there was nothing. The mist. It's getting thicker. 8 choices. Zabuza's voice came through the mist. Liver, lungs, spine, clavicle vein, neck vein, brain, kidneys, heart. Which one should I aim for? Kakashi brought his hands together in a ram seal, focusing through his Sharingan eye only. He could feel his entire team shaking. Sakura was quivering but standing in formation as she should. Naruto wasn't shaking as much, but was still shivering. Sasuke was the worst off of the 3. The boy was about to stab himself with a kunai when Kakashi spoke. Sasuke, don't worry. I'll protect you all, even if it kills me. I won't let my comrades die. Sasuke suddenly stopped shaking, so did Sakura, but Naruto was still trembling. What Kakashi didn't realize, however, was that the blonde was shaking in fear. No, he was shaking in anticipation. He couldn't wait for Zabuza to trap Kakashi, no offense to the Junin, so he could have his turn at the sword-wielding missing nin. We'll see about that. Zabuza appeared in the gap between the genin and Tazuna, his sword held behind him via his left hand, his right held in a half-ram seal. Kakashi's eyes widened as he turned and lunged, kunai at the ready. He pushed the three genin and Tazuna out of the way as he ran the kunai into Zabuza's stomach. To his shock, and slight horror, blood didn't come from the wound like it should. It was water. A second Zabuza appeared behind Kakashi, giant sword already swinging forward. Kakashi's Sharingan eye swirled for a moment before the Zabuza in front of him collapsed into a puddle of water. The sword cut Kakashi clean in half, the top part of his body seeming to float in mid-air. But, like the first Zabuza's wound, there was no blood. Only water. Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. No way. The two halves of Kakashi turned into the clear liquid, and the snick of a kunai being drawn could be heard just in front of Zabuza's neck. Don't move. It's over. Sakura stared at Kakashi with admiration in her eyes, and Sasuke with respect. Both wore wide smiles on their faces. Naruto, however, was smirking and subtly shaking his head. This match was nowhere near over. Hee hee. Zabuza chuckled, it's over. I don't think you get it. There's no way you can defeat me with your monkey-like imitations. It was impressive though. You had your clone support your team, saying those words that kept them together. You did to attract my attention while you hid in the mist, watching me. You truly are quite the ninja, Sharingan Kakashi. However, Kakashi waited. He didn't like the sounds of this. That last word implied that the Zabuza he currently had was yet another water clone. Sure enough, Zabuza appeared behind the Konoha Junin, the one in front falling into a puddle of water. That one is a fake as well. Sakura screamed. Zabuza's cleaver swung, Kakashi ducking just in time. The momentum behind the blade caused it to turn full circle, the end of the blade crashing into the ground behind Zabuza. Kakashi's legs swung out in an arc, aimed at Zabuza's ankles. The missing nin quickly swapped hands on the end of his sword's handle, using it as a balance to avoid the sweep kick. His leg shot out and just missed Kakashi, who jumped away on all fours towards the water. Zabuza went to follow and narrowly avoided treading on the makebishi, nails that always had one point facing up, that Kakashi had scattered when he went flying. With a chuckle, Zabuza simply jumped from his place on the land, kicking up some of the makebishi and a bit of dust, before landing behind Kakashi on the lake. Kakashi frowned at the water that was dripping from his arms and head. It was way too heavy to be normal water. Suiro no Jutsu. The water around Kakashi formed up into a sphere, trapping the ninja inside. Zabuza chuckled even more, and brought his free hand up in front of his face, once again making a one-handed seal. Kakashi, we'll finish things later. But right now, I have a job to do. Mizu Bunshin no Jutsu. Another clone rose up from the lake, water dripping from its sword and arms. The clone stepped forward onto the land. He disappeared into the fog, sending the genin on high alert again. A second later, Naruto was sent flying, his bag falling from his shoulder mid-flight. The blonde scowled and flipped so he would land on his feet. Zabuza's legs slowly came back down to the ground, his arm reaching over his shoulder for his sword. You guys! Kakashi screamed. Take Tazuna and run. The water clone can't go far from his real body. As long as he is keeping me trapped, he can't move. Just run. Now. Naruto wiped the bottom of his lip with his thumb, collecting some of the blood that had spilled from his busted lip. What's the point, sensei? Even if we run, he'll kill you and then come after us. We may as well stand and fight. Naruto reached behind him and pulled the earlier scroll from his pouch, breaking its seal with his middle fingernail. The scroll unraveled by itself, revealing a set of 6 seals within. Naruto's bloody thumb ran over all 6 seals as they were shown, but none of the seals released the familiar cloud of smoke until Naruto made a half-ram seal with his free hand. Instead of 6 separate clouds of smoke, one large one was released from the scroll. The smoke was blown away after a second, to reveal a glimmering steel sword that looked far more advanced than any weaponry available in Konoha. The weapon looked somewhat similar to Zabuza's sword, the handle being relatively long and the blade huge. Instead of curving at the end like Zabuza's cleaver, however, it stopped and jutted diagonally up and across. Several catches were visible, and Kakashi could discern several different blades that made up the one. Altogether, the sword was easily 5 feet, possibly even 5.5. Taller than Naruto at least, who was 4 feet, 11.5 inches tall. The blonde deftly caught the red handle of the giant sword, his pinky only just managing to hang onto the weapon's sealing scroll. Grabbing the scroll with his offhand, he rolled it back up with a flick off his wrist, stashing it away in his pouch before taking up the sword with both hands. Meet my fusion swords. 6 years of research, experiments and a lot of money, and Kenji 2-san came up with this baby. Zabuza smirked. Naruto smirked back. Sasuke glared at the blade, wanting it for himself despite the fact he didn't know how to use it. Sakura was staring at Naruto with a new sense of admiration and respect. Kakashi stared at the blade in awe, momentarily distracted from the fact his team was about to be slaughtered. Let's get wild. Naruto dashed forward, surprising his team with how easily he seemed to wield the giant sword. Kakashi was the only one who noticed how he was doing it, and that was because of his Sharingan. Naruto's chakra was strengthening his muscles so he could swing around the sword like it was his normal ninjutsu. Said chakra flared at the boy's feet as he jumped forward, bringing the sword down in an overhead strike. The resounding boom that came from the clash sent any animal in 50 yards running for the hills. The ground under the Zabuza clone was crushed inwards, but the water clone remained standing although he was straining to keep the boy up with his own sword. Naruto's eyes flicked around, taking in his surroundings as he made a plan of attack. The mist was beginning to thin, which made it easier to see the surrounding trees and rocks. Using the handle as a springboard, Naruto launched himself away from Zabuza, straight at a tree to his left. The blonde landed on the tree although he remained for only a second before shooting towards Zabuza again. Naruto swung the sword mid-jump, using the momentum to continue the spin even when Zabuza blocked it. He hit the ex-assassin's sword a few times before he was pushed off by the clone. Naruto landed in a crouch, his sword resting over his shoulder, panting and sweat dripping down his chin. I need to practice with this thing more. It's wearing me down too quickly. But man, it's fun. The real Zabuza chuckled from beside Kakashi. Still just a novice, brat. Kakashi's head snapped around to Zabuza, and then back to Naruto. These two had met. What the hell was going on here? Sakura stared in horror at Naruto. He knew Zabuza from before today. What if he was working for them? He only came to Konoha a month or so ago, right? Sasuke was having similar thoughts as Sakura, but added a few extra of his own. If he was working with the Junin, why would they be fighting? Something isn't right here. Naruto grinned. Bring it on, old man. The Zabuza clone made a come on then motion with his offhand, a smirk visible from the wrinkles in the bandages. Naruto sent a small burst of chakra into one of the latches as he ran forward, a dagger-like blade popping from the sword. Naruto grabbed it in his left hand and swung it around, the handle folding out from the blade. It was about the same length as his forearm. Naruto swung the main blade toward the clone, which was intercepted by Zabuza's sword. Naruto grinned and lunged forward with his smaller blade, piercing the water clone's bicep. The skin where the clone's eyebrows should have been rose a tiny bit in shock, before it shattered into a torrent of water. Naruto grinned and dashed to the side, slamming his sword into the ground when he was clear of Zabuza's path. Sasuke, give us a flame. Naruto called. Sasuke stared at the blonde in a dumb kind of shock. What? One of your fire jutsu, aim them at Zabuza. Sasuke shook his head to clear it. He decided that even if Naruto was working with this man, he wasn't going to pass up a free opportunity to take out a Junin. He ran through the well-practiced hand seals for his favorite technique. Kaden. Gukaku no Jutsu. Sasuke's chest puffed out much further than anyone would have thought possible, before he blew through a ring made of his first 2 fingers. Naruto watched as the giant fireball ignited and was spewed from Sasuke's mouth, straight at Zabuza with frightening speed. Just as the fireball reached the lake, 3 water clones of Zabuza appeared in front of the fireball in an attempt to stop the fireball by dousing it with water after the clones were hit. Naruto brought his hands together for a jutsu of his own. Fuden. Daitapa. Wind seemed to gather just behind Naruto before it exploded forward, following the same path of the fireball except a lot faster. The wind encompassed the fire, and for a moment Naruto thought he had screwed up by putting too much chakra into the technique, but then the fire seemed to swallow the wind, rapidly growing in size. The added momentum sent the fireball rocketing forward, destroying the clones without putting so much as a damper on the flames. Zabuza glared at Naruto before he released the water prison, quickly escaping the fire's path. Kakashi mimicked his opponent's action, thankful Zabuza had released the prison with enough time for him to escape. Zabuza growled from the back of his throat and cracked his knuckles. Damn brat, you can explain the situation to your team. But, sensei, Naruto whined. Kakashi stared at Naruto. Sensei, what the hell is going on here, Naruto? I want a damn explanation, now. Naruto sighed with an over-exaggerated wave of his arm. Leaning against the broad guard, he grinned across to his team and sensei. Well, I met Zabuza when I was 10, so about 2 years ago. Kenji had to leave and he arranged for a new instructor while he was gone. Turns out, that instructor was Zabuza sensei here. Zabuza sensei became my primary instructor for 6 months before he caught word of the Mist's Hunter Nins finally tracking him down. Turned out to be a lie, but he didn't stay long after that. We decided that if we ever met in the field, we would have one battle to test each other. If I was able to beat one of his clones, then he would agree to working with me on whatever my mission was. I figured that since the real body was vulnerable, I'd try and beat that one too. Zabuza shrugged, ignoring the last part. He knew that Naruto was trying to get revenge for the harsh training he had put him through. He would get it later, that much was guaranteed. That's pretty much the gist of it. I owe Kenji for saving my life from the Hunter Nins about 6 years ago, so I am repaying him by training his son. The man turned to glare at Naruto. Although, you still suck with that sword of yours, haven't you been training with it at all? Naruto grinned sheepishly and scratched the back of his neck. Kakashi was confused, but would accept the situation for now. He trusted Kenji more than he trusted the Hokage, and he was the Hokage's man through and through. Sakura's jaw was on the ground, disbelief clearly visible in her eyes. Sasuke frowned. Naruto had been instructed by this monster of a Junin before he was even an official ninja. That sucked. You mean, Sakura started slowly, we have been going through hell with that killing intent, and Kakashi wasted his chakra, for no reason. By the end of it, she was screaming. Zabuza chuckled darkly. Oh no, little girl. If Naruto hadn't beaten my clone, I would have killed all of you and finished my job. The only one I would have left alive would be Naruto. Sasuke's scowl grew deeper. Their lives were riding on Naruto that entire fight. He would not accept that. He was glad he got to have some part in the fight, but was still annoyed he never got to test his own abilities against a formidable opponent. Seemingly out of nowhere, a short figure appeared just behind Zabuza. He was dressed in a kind of green striped jumpsuit, a darker green and cream-edged kimono over the top. A dark brown sash kept the kimono closed, and he wore elevated wooden sandals instead of standard shinobi ones. His long black hair was tied into a bun at the back, but 2 long bangs framed either side of the mask he wore. Said mask was plain white, with red spiral-like designs on the chin and the Kurigakure pattern on the forehead. In the boy's arms was the white rabbit from earlier. Kakashi was immediately on guard. If Zabuza was their new ally, then he should protect him from Hunter Nins, which is what this boy obviously was. Right. Haku-chan. Naruto cried. The boy took away his mask, revealing the face of a beautiful girl. She was smiling at Naruto, her eyes shining. Naruto lunged forward and wrapped his arms around the girl, Haku returning the hug with just as much fervor. The two Chunin from earlier, who Kakashi was sure he tied up, dropped down beside the pair and clapped Naruto on the shoulder with the hand that wasn't covered by a gauntlet. Haku turned so her head slightly so her lips were facing Naruto's ear. I told you we'd see each other again. I know. It's good to see you again, Haku-chan. The pair split when Maizu coughed rather pointedly, the mask covering his mouth giving it a strange metallic sound. Zabuza nodded towards the brothers, who disappeared up into the trees again, and made his way across to Kakashi. The group started out again, Sakura asking questions about Naruto's life before Konoha and Sasuke listening intently, although he tried not to show it. Maizu and Guzu are just scouting ahead. Gato doesn't trust me, and I don't blame him. But, as long as he is still under the impression we are working for him, I plan on going back there. I'll take the brothers with me. They heard some of Gato's men talking about hiring more ninja to finish us off after we killed the old man. Apparently there are 3 of them, but they charge as if they were one Junin, instead of separate entities like we did. If that's true, then they will attack in 10 days. That is when my contract expires. I'll try and gather what information I can and relay it back to you through one of the brothers. I'm grateful, Zabuza-kun. But, why are you telling me this and not Naruto? Asked Kakashi. You are the commanding officer of the team, you need to be informed. And Naruto will have enough on his plate for the next week or so. I suggest you train your students a bit. Gato won't rely only on those ninja he hires, he will use his thugs as well. Kakashi looked ahead to his team, and jogged ahead to catch up. Well, Zabuza-kun and the demon brothers will be heading back to their hideout once we reach the village. Haku, is it? Well, it is up to you, but you can stay with us or with Zabuza, since he didn't mention anything about you. Haku knew why Zabuza hadn't mentioned her going back to the hideout. If it is alright, I would like to stay with your team. It had been a long time since I've been able to see Naruto-kun, and it will be nice to be with people closer to my own age. Sakura looked across at the girl. How old are you exactly? Haku smiled. I'm 15. Naruto grinned. And she could kick Kakashi-sensei's ass if she wanted to. Haku shook her head at the incredulous looks Sasuke and Sakura were giving her. It was good to see Naruto had friends now, after spending so many years with no one but his family. Ah, we are almost there. Tazuna called from between the teens and the men, pointing to a break in the trees ahead. Well, it's about time. Lugging this thing around is killing me, ya know. Naruto exclaimed, waving wildly with his reassembled sword. Zabuza, why is that old bridge builder not dead yet? Gato demanded, swinging his hand in obvious fury. Zabuza's eyes cut across to the shipping magnate. He has a Konoha Junin acting as bodyguard. And not just any Junin either, this one is used to be an Anbu captain. Taking someone of his skill out will require time and preparation. Gato signaled for his 2 bodyguards to step forward. Both drew their swords as they followed their paycheck's command. You listen to me, Momochi. You had better kill that old man before the week is up, or those hunter nin you are so afraid of may receive an anonymous tip as to your whereabouts. Zabuza growled at the threat and gave a subtle nod of his head. 2 dark, clawed gauntlets suddenly found their way to the necks of Gato's bodyguards, and the tip of Zabuza's Kubikiri Haucho was just touching the tip of Gato's nose. You threaten me again, you'll find out exactly why this sword is called a decapitating knife. Gato stumbled backwards but managed to keep on his feet. Just make sure it's done. Zori, Waraji, we're leaving. The 2 bodyguards backed away from the demon brothers carefully before they sheathed their swords and went ahead of their boss. As Gato walked out the door behind the pair, he turned just enough so that he could see Zabuza through the corner of his eye and smirked. Zabuza watched the door slam behind the short man and growled. That bastard is definitely planning something. You too. He looked across to the demon brothers, find out who the hell he has got on his payroll. On it. the pair stated. The two disappeared in a cloud of smoke, leaving Zabuza to continue with his plans. 146, 147, 148, 149, 150. You can stop now. Naruto collapsed onto the forest floor, sucking in as much air as he possibly could. Sitting atop his back was not only his fusion swords but also the cross-legged form of Haku. After 100 vertical push-ups with Haku standing on his feet and 150 with the girl and his sword on his back, Naruto was definitely feeling the strain on his muscles. You've certainly gotten better, Naruto-kun. 2 years ago, you couldn't even make it to 50. And that was without me on your back. The blonde moaned in response, causing Haku to giggle once more. Get off, I'm suffocating down here. Haku obliged and Naruto shook his giant sword from his back as well, reveling in the lightness he felt after carrying such a heavy weight. He shifted into a sitting position, leaning back on his palms and frowned across at Haku, who grinned in return. Remind me to never let you design my training regime. Damn well worse than Zabuza-sensei you are. Oh, that's a lie and you know it, Haku said. Naruto shrugged and rolled his shoulder, the feeling quickly returning. He was very glad for his advanced healing, even if it did come from a demonic fox sealed in his gut. Maybe, Naruto answered, but then again, maybe not. Oi, Naruto, team training. Come on. Naruto glanced up into the branches overhead and saw Kakashi looking down at him, his book open and usual eye smile in place. Yeah, I'm coming, Naruto grumbled. Kakashi dropped down beside the boy. Don't be so glum. You can train some more with your lady friend later. Naruto's eyebrow twitched and he snatched for Kakashi's book, only to have his hand slapped away. She's not my girlfriend. Naruto picked up his sword and stomped off through the forest, leaving a bewildered Kakashi and a blushing Haku behind. I never said girlfriend, but Naruto took lady friend to mean girlfriend, so he must. Oh, I am going to have so much fun. Kakashi waved politely to Haku before he took off after his blonde student, already planning the many different ways to tease Naruto. Okay. Since there is no guarantee that Gato won't hire more ninja to attack Tazuna-san, we will be doing some training so you can help if it comes to a battle. You'll be climbing trees. Naruto stared at Kakashi with a rather incredulous look on his face. The tree climbing exercise? Is he serious? But, sensei, we can already climb trees, Sakura pointed out, Sasuke grunting in agreement. True, Kakashi started, but you will be learning to climb trees without your hands. With that, Kakashi walked rather lazily up the trunk of a nearby tree until he was hanging upside down from a branch. He smiled to his team and started to explain how the exercise worked. Sakura and Sasuke both paid attention, listening to every word that Kakashi said. Naruto, however, Kakashi noticed, was picking at dirt trapped under his fingernails. 3 kunai landed in front of the genin, and Kakashi instructed them to mark their progress on the tree. Sasuke took off running, only making it up 3 steps before sliding back down the tree. Sakura made 5 steps before she slipped and fell as well. Naruto, deciding to play along, ran up 7 steps, marked his place with the kunai, and back-flipped off the tree. Soon enough Sakura was halfway up the tree, sitting on a branch and playing with the kunai. Sasuke was still struggling with it and Naruto had all but given up. Kakashi watched the blonde with a frown, trying to decide what to do with him. Alright then, Sakura, I want you to keep running up and down the tree until you get exhausted. Sasuke, keep practicing until you get the hang on it. Naruto, come with me. Kakashi took off through the trees, Naruto following along the ground. As the pair got out of earshot, Kakashi called out to the blonde. Naruto, come up here already. Naruto nodded and leapt onto the thickest branch he could find, repeating the process until he was even with Kakashi. So, you already know the tree climbing exercise. I think it's safe to assume you know the water walking exercise as well. Naruto nodded. Alright then, have you ever heard of shape transformation? Kakashi asked. I've read about it. Naruto's brow furrowed in concentration. It's supposed to be an advanced form of chakra control. According to the promotion guidelines set forth by the third, it is very basically covered upon promotion of Chunin and then more advanced material is made available to Junins. It is also vital in the creation of new techniques. Kakashi's eyebrow rose in surprise. How do you know so much about that? I read a lot when I was younger, Naruto stated with a shrug. Right. Well anyway, you're correct. Generally shape transformation is reserved for Junin to learn, and even then many Junin don't bother. It's extremely difficult, and a lot of ninja have an, if it works, don't fix it, mentality. However, when mastered, shape transformation can make existing techniques far more powerful than they normally are. It's also, as you put it, vital to creating new jutsu. There are some basic exercises that you can do to get used to manipulating the shape of your chakra. The most common form is making chakra visible to even the naked eye. This generally takes a few months of training, but with your chakra capacity, I wouldn't be surprised if you could get it in a couple of weeks. I'll show you some manipulation exercises, like making a leaf curl into a tube, if you can manage that. Naruto arched his eyebrow in confusion. So, I just build up enough chakra that it becomes visible. Right, Kakashi answered. It's generally easier to focus on one point of your body, like your hand for example, and make the chakra visible there. Okay then. Naruto took off through the forest, looking for a clearing and leaving Kakashi to do whatever it is he did. Several times he almost hit a tree because of the extra weight of his sword. He finally found the clearing he and Haku had been in before and dropped to the forest floor, landing with a heavy thud. Dumping his sword against a nearby tree, Naruto sat down and crossed his legs, making the ram hand seal. Settling in for a long bout of meditation, Naruto closed his eyes and focused his chakra. Naruto's eyes slowly opened, dim light reflecting off the water surrounding him. A gust of wind suddenly rushed across the room, carrying a foul scent with it, whipping up the water straight towards Naruto's face. Ducking his head, he avoided getting any of the murky water in his eyes, but his hair was soaked to the point of being almost flat. Naruto looked up through his blonde bangs and glared at the source of the wind. Hello, Kyuubi. Come a little closer, oh jailer of mine. Just a little closer so I can tear you to shreds. The giant fox roared. Shut up already. Naruto slowly stood up in a manner similar to Kakashi, lazily but at the same time purposefully. What am I doing here, anyway? I'm supposed to be trying to make my chakra visible, he said more to himself than to the fox. Cerulean eyes wandered from the nine-tailed kitsune, who was ranting about something or other, and looked around the cavernous room. The walls were made of slate-gray bricks that seemed to absorb any light that touched them. Pipes ran along the roof and walls of the room, some glowing red whilst others glowed blue, signifying his chakra circulatory system. The water around his ankles was murky and rather disgusting to walk in. Thankfully he could stand atop it instead. I really don't like my mindscape. Another wave of water came rushing at him and Naruto growled in annoyance. That blasted demon was starting to annoy him. Acting on instinct alone, Naruto lashed out with his hand and was surprised when the veritable tsunami halted in its tracks and changed course, straight back at the Kyuubi. A few seconds later, a loud yelp and the sound of spluttering reached Naruto's ears and he smirked in triumph. That's what you get, stupid fox. Why did you pull me here? Why in damnation would I call you here? Your filthy presence disgusts me, the Kyuubi growled, its tone laced with loathing. Naruto motioned to the surrounding room. Look where you live. And you call me filthy? He said with a bit of a chuckle. The demon slammed against the iron-wrought bars of its cage. Let me out, and I'll damn well show you my home. It's called the underworld. Yeah, whatever you reckon. If you didn't call me here then I'm going to take a look around. Naruto waved over his shoulder as he walked out of the cavern through an opening in the wall opposite the cage. A loud roar echoed behind him, and Naruto chuckled a little more. Looking down the halls of his mind, Naruto noticed that the blue pipes that ran to the left had a stronger glow than the ones on the right, and decided to follow them. The further away from the seal he got, the clearer the water became until he could see the faded gray stone floor beneath. The walls also slowly faded from slate gray to almost white, although it wasn't quite that far. Light seemed more prominent away from the seal as well, and the red pipelines faded from the strong crimson they had been. Turning a corner, Naruto noticed a room of bright light ahead, which both the pipelines ran towards. His pace quickened as he hurried to reach the source, wondering exactly what it was when he heard something echo along the halls. Ruto. Na. 2. Uruto. Naruto. What the hell? Naruto whispered, spinning around wildly to try and find the source of the voice. He felt a tug at his navel and his eyes widened when he fell face first towards the water. Bracing himself for the impact, he waited. Naruto. Wake the hell up, damn it. Slap. Hey. Hey. Ow. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his hand reaching up to rub his stinging cheek. Naruto, do you have any idea how long we have been looking for you? I mean, come on. We've been screaming your name for almost an hour. Yelled Sakura, her hand still at the ready for another slap. Naruto held up his free hand in defense. I'm sorry, please don't hit me. I was meditating and kind of zoned out. Sakura huffed in annoyance and stood up from her crouching position, stomping off through the clearing. Hurry up. Tsunami-san has made us dinner. It's probably gone cold by now. Geez. Naruto shook his head to clear the stars brought on by Sakura's hand. Using the tree behind him as support, he dragged himself to his feet and grabbed his sword, following the pink-haired girl through the trees. Damn crazy girl. Slapping me for no reason. But, what was with that light? It felt kind of weird, but, in a good way. Am I going crazy? Naruto noticed everyone staring at him when he walked into the house, promptly ignored them and sat down to eat his now slightly cold fish and rice. Naruto. Sakura started, staring not at the blonde but at his sword. I was wondering if you could explain how your sword works. I mean, it looks really advanced. Naruto hummed in agreement, still chewing on his food, but he quickly glanced around the room. Everyone was curious about his sword, even Haku, who had seen it in action on several occasions. Swallowing, he reached behind him and grabbed the sword from its place on the floor. I call them fusion swords, but technically it is known as the first Tsurugi, because it is the first in a series of advanced swords Dad plans on developing, Naruto explained. I'll show you all the different pieces in a sec, I just want to finish the last of this rice. Naruto inhaled the rest of his food and led the group to the more open space of the living room. Disassembling the sword, he spread the blades out in a semicircle with him sitting in the middle. The two on the end are the Ryuken, the companion swords. They are attached to either side of the sword and cover up the hilts of all the others attached. They're also pretty good for close combat. Said blades were the size of small swords, or in a sense a wide mid-blade. The sword in itself was about 2 feet in length. Instead of a hand guard, that each had a complex-looking gear system which retracted the handle and placed them alongside the back of the blade. The swords were mirror images of each other, a series of 5 small circular dents running up the length of one side of the blade. The next two are the Kinko-ken, the balance swords. They attach to the back of the assembled sword to provide balance and some extra weight. Kind of weird to fight with on their own, but pretty awesome once you know how. The next two were once again, mirror images of each other. Each of the blades was saw-toothed, with each of the teeth being sharpened along the flat edge. The swords, blade and hilt included, reached to roughly 4 and a bit feet long. The hilt was black and had a ridge along it every 15 centimeters or so, giving distinguished handholds. Now for the business end, the Kyuko-ken, it attaches to the front of the sword to become the cutting edge of the blade. By itself it's still one hell of a sword though. This sword was all blade, with only a small part at the end where it met the hilt. The hilt itself was split down the middle, along with the rest of the back of the sword, leaving it hollow so it could easily attach to the main sword. The hilt was wrapped in a strange red material that looked like leather, but felt more like cotton or something of that sort. And finally we have the Chushin Ken, the center sword and the heart of the first Tsurugi. Everything attached to this to make up the sword I normally use. It's a bit weird, but technologically one of the most advanced swords on the continent. The Chushin Ken was easily the largest of all the swords, being about 5.5 feet long. The hand guard was huge, with several slots for the other swords to fit into. The blade was split into two, equally long segments. The bottom segment was wide and thick, which merged into the top segment which was narrow and ended in a point. The hilt was wrapped in the same red material as the Kyuko Ken, and was about 1.5 feet long. The group edged closer to get a look at the weapons. Just as they got within range of the semicircle, Naruto grinned and twisted the very end of the Chushin Ken's hilt. The blade snapped in half lengthwise, being locked apart by a series of metal links and gears running up the length of the now split blade. Sakura and Tazuna jumped back in surprise, while Sasuke's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. Ah, Kakashi thought, I thought it looked a lot wider before. They all fit back together with a series of switches that can be activated by short bursts of chakra for quick release, so it's a pretty versatile sword. I've also been thinking about trying a new technique with all the different pieces but haven't really gotten around to testing it yet, Naruto said. I see, Kakashi stated. So, when does Kenji-senpai plan on releasing the next sword? Naruto shrugged in reply. Don't know. I think he said something about 2 years, but I can't be sure. Before anyone could say anything else, a shadow blurred into the room, the door slamming shut behind it. Naruto immediately had the Chushin Ken aimed at whoever it was, and Kakashi tensed as well. When the light settled around them, it revealed the form of Maizu, lacking his usual mask and horned forehead protector, and in civilian clothes. Gato and his men have never seen me or Guzu outside of our ninja outfits. Easier to sneak around like this, the man explained. But I have some information for you. Go on, Kakashi said. Well, Guzu and I were taking a peek at some of Gato's personnel files, and we found something rather interesting. Aside from the hundreds of bandits he had hired, those 3 ninja we heard rumors about and none other than Hanjinki Sankyodai. Kakashi's eye widened astronomically. Are you certain? Positive. They are also bringing along their subordinates. I'm surprised they are charging less than us, despite the fact there are more of them, Maizu said with a frown. Sensei, what is the Hanjinki Sankyodai? Sakura asked. More like who? Kakashi started. The Half-Life triplets, 3 ninja siblings that tried to destroy their home village, Iwagakure, because the Tsuchikage kept them separated. After that, they started up their own gang of bandits and have been hunted by Iwa ever since. Every ninja or bounty hunter that has gotten close enough to kill them has been slaughtered in such a way that it makes even me feel a bit queasy. The question is why the hell did Gato hire them, of all people? Their base of operations is supposed to be on the other side of the continent. Maizu folded his arms and his frown deepened. We aren't sure yet. Guzu is trying to find out right now. But even Zabuza, as strong as he is, can't take on the triplets and win. Their teamwork is even better than mine and my brother's. We need to find a way to separate them and still fight their thugs, along with Gato's men. Duh. That's what we're here for. Zabuza-sensei, Kakashi-sensei, you and your brother and Haku-chan are all really strong. While you are fighting those half-triplets or whatever, we can hold off some half-wit bandits, Naruto said, poking himself in the chest with his thumb. Kakashi folded his arms over his chest and closed his visible eye, a smile forming under his mask. So much like Obito. Is that so? Well then, I guess we shouldn't worry. Maizu shook his head, not sure whether to be amused by Naruto's statement or reassured. The kid was good, he'd admit that much, but he was still no match for any well-trained Chunin. Listen, I've got to head out, the demon brother said. If I'm away too long, people will start to notice. Either Guzu or I will bring you Zabuza's plans in the next few days. Catch ya later. With that, Maizu disappeared with a strong gust of wind. Kakashi nodded to himself, letting his chin rest against his collarbone. If Sasuke and Sakura were going to survive the coming fight, they were going to need more than a bit of chakra control training. He wouldn't put it past the triplets to try and attack fresh genin to distract him. Sasuke, you're going to have to step up your training with the tree walking, you need to get that finished before I teach you anything else. Sakura, you will be with me tomorrow. I'm going to teach you some basic genjutsu techniques, your level of control is perfect for illusions. What about Naruto? Why does he get to skip training? Sasuke demanded. Naruto has already mastered the tree climbing exercise and will be guarding Tazuna with Haku. That is, if you don't mind. Kakashi directed the last part towards the girl. Haku smiled and nodded. That's fine. Naruto, however, was frowning. His clones could easily protect Tazuna and pass on a message quicker through the memory absorption ability. He watched Kakashi reach into his backpack and pull out a pair of long-range transmitters. Handing one to Naruto, he showed him how to set it up. From now on, you and I will be in constant contact. I want you to never take your eyes off of Tazuna-san from the moment he leaves this house in the morning until he returns in the afternoon. The Hanjinki Sankyodai might already be watching the bridge. Roger, Naruto said. Okay. I think it's time everyone got some sleep, called Tsunami, who had just come back downstairs after putting her son to bed. Kakashi bowed his head in agreement. Yeah, I think you're right, Tsunami-san. Make sure you get a good night's sleep, guys. You'll need the energy tomorrow. 2 days of nothing but guard duty was driving Naruto crazy. There was only so much he and Haku could talk about. All day long he essentially just lazed about on the side of the bridge, soaking up as much sun as he could and watched the workers slowly disappear. He had been replacing them with his clones, but they could only do so much. They weren't trained carpenters or other kinds of tradesmen. So tonight, to break his monotonous duties, he was going to sneak out and take a good look around the village. Maybe do some spying of his own in Gato's base, if he found it. Cracking an eye open, he looked around the room to find everyone else asleep on their mats and sleeping bags. Grinning, he slipped out of his pajamas to reveal his normal clothes underneath, and crept across the wooden floor to the depression where the shoes were left. Quickly sliding on his sandals, he quietly slid open the door just enough to slip through, and waved cheekily at his sleeping teammates and Haku. Once through, he took a deep breath before racing down the wharf, excitement bubbling in his chest. Back inside, Haku's eyes slowly opened and she couldn't help but frown. What is he up to now? Mimicking the blonde's actions, she snuck out and made to discreetly follow Naruto when she realized he had completely left her senses. I don't remember him being this fast, she thought to herself. Haku took to the rooftops once she reached the main part of the village, avoiding the wandering homeless and any patrols that might be out for a moonlit stroll. Her speed increased to almost maximum as she grew ever more frantic, not finding Naruto anywhere within the village. Deciding to try a different angle, she turned on her heel and started towards Gato's base of operations. His shipping company was located on the coast, and she seriously doubted Naruto would go that way. Sure enough, she soon found her runaway blonde bounding across rooftops headed straight towards Gato's mansion. Naruto-kun, wait up. Haku came to a halt beside the blonde, who had finally stopped atop the roof of a tall building. She looked at the boy, and followed his gaze across to a large mansion that looked more like a castle. Surrounded on 3 sides by walls, the 4th side opposite the main gate was protected by a giant waterfall. Along the top of the walls were sword-carrying thugs and several volley guns prepped with God knows what kind of ammunition. Why are we here, Naruto-kun? Haku asked, seeing the worry in Naruto's cerulean eyes. My family's home, Naruto whispered, the birthplace of the Namikaze clan. And that bastard Gato is corrupting it. Haku gasped in shock. She hadn't known it belonged to Naruto's clan. Are you sure? The blonde merely pointed to the large gates in the middle of the wall. In the middle of both gates, burnt into the wood was a giant circle, a large wave coming out of the left side with a smaller wave more towards the right of the circle. I always just thought that they represented the land of wave. Naruto-kun, I am so sorry. A menacing growl pierced the silence of the night, and Haku stared at her best friend, horrified. His teeth were bared in a feral snarl, the long canines catching the moonlight in an eerie manner. His whisker marks were deepening and his nails were growing. But all of that was nothing compared to his eyes. His normally beautiful cerulean eyes that sparkled with joy and mirth were now crimson red, Naruto's wrath visible through them and giving them an even darker quality. I'm going to damn well rip that bastard's head off. No you're not. Kakashi's lazy voice drawled. The silver-haired Junin stepped out from the shadows, his arms crossed and his visible eye serious. Naruto growled at the Junin and took a menacing step towards him, which Kakashi mimicked, making Naruto back up in shock. Even with that chakra, do you really think you are capable of defeating me? Let it go, Naruto. Getting angry in a situation like this solves nothing. If you really want revenge, you should go take a look around. Find out where he sleeps, see if he keeps any personal information around. Killing him now will just leave the bandits without a leader, which in turn will probably end up as the end of this land. They'll overrun it without any direction and ultimately destroy it. Naruto felt a soft hand on his shoulder, and looked around to see Haku smiling sympathetically at him. Slowly but surely, Naruto began to calm down enough that the demon chakra receded from his system, returning his features back to their normal state. Kakashi nodded and I smiled toward the blonde, whilst Haku hugged the blonde. Naruto returned the embrace and felt the heat rising up his neck and cheeks, blood rushing to his head. He tried to fight it back down, after all he was a ninja down. Ninja didn't blush. He slowly let his arms fall from the small of Haku's back and steadied his breathing, trying to get his rapidly beating heart back under control. Once he finally regained his composure, he looked towards his sensei. I don't really know how to do that stuff, Naruto explained. I mean, I know the basics of infiltration and recon, but most of my training has been towards becoming an elite. Kakashi nodded in understanding. Not many ninja were willing to become reconnaissance experts as they were the ones that went behind enemy lines to gather intelligence on enemies. It was those kind of shinobi that were subject to the most scrutiny within the ninja world. Fears of them having turned code or being manipulated by some jutsu were always in mind when they returned home. Of the few reconnaissance and espionage that Konoha had, only Jiraiya of the Sannin was never questioned. And even then, it was only because he had been constantly providing vital information to Konoha for over 20 years. I'll be right here. They are just thugs, so you should be fine. If you manage to get in and out without being noticed, I'll teach you a nifty jutsu I picked up during the war for sneaking around. Naruto's eyes lit up at the words, new jutsu, and he immediately set out to find a quiet way into the house. Kakashi shook his head in amusement whilst Haku watched with a soft frown. She could sense chakra to a minor extent, and she knew there was at least one person in that mansion that had chakra levels that were well above any old thugs. Ah yeah, that's the stuff. A high-pitched voice exclaimed, his words slightly slurred. A deep, rumbling voice replied, if you drink all that sake, I'll cut you into itty-bitty pieces, Kako. Naruto watched as the two argued over the large porcelain jug of alcohol and grinned at the idiocy of the pair. Getting over the wall had been easy, he just waited until there was a gap in the patrol and leapt across the walkway, sliding down the other side of the wall with his chakra. The pair's argument grew heated and, Taking the opportunity, Naruto slipped past the two thugs without making a sound, his feet barely touching the ground as he dashed across the barely lit courtyard. He made sure to slide around any slivers of moonlight that fell across the ground, sticking to the shadows as much as possible. Naruto came up to the wall and immediately pressed his back against it, mentally kicking himself for not grabbing his ninjutsu on the way out of the house. His eyes trailed across the yard, his special ninja diet allowing him to see clearly through the darkness of the night. Glancing at the main doors to the house, he frowned and shook his head. Standing on either side were four thugs, each armed to the teeth with all manner of sharp and pointy instruments. No good. I need to find another way in. This is a ninja household, there has got be some kind of hidden entrance. Naruto ran through his jutsu list in his head and his frown deepened. Aside from the Shunshin jutsu, he had nothing that could help in a situation like this. He moved towards the edge of the wall and deftly slipped around the side. This side was much darker, the walls of the mansion protecting it from the light of the moon. He crept along the side of the wall, his senses on high alert, always looking for someone that might spot him. Just ahead he noticed a puddle of water and a constant small stream running from somewhere above the puddle. Following the trail of water, he noticed a pipe sticking out from the wall of the house, easily wide enough to fit a small child through. Naruto looked at his shoulders before looking back at the pipe and almost swore. His shoulders were broader than the pipe was, if he was going to go in that way he would have to dislocate one of them. Thankfully he had had to dislocate his shoulder many times as part of his training with Kenji and Zabuza, in the case that he was tied up and couldn't use his chakra. Any decent ninja could sense the output of chakra, even for something like the rope escape technique. Relaxing his shoulders, Naruto tucked his fist into the pit of his left arm and put it at an awkward angle before jerking upwards with his fist. A sickening pop sounded, along with an almost slurping kind of noise, and Naruto's left shoulder was dislocated. He immediately bit down on his lip to keep from screaming. His teeth tore through the skin and blood began to both pool in his mouth and ooze down his chin. The coppery-tasting liquid ran over his tongue, making Naruto feel a little sick as well as in pain. Taking a few deep breaths, Naruto calmed himself before spitting the blood out and clenching his jaw, grinding his teeth together. Never was he so thankful for his ability to walk on completely vertical surfaces without the aid of his hands. I better damn well get that jutsu off Kakashi-sensei. No matter how many times I do this, it hurts like a bitch. He walked up the wall, his left arm hanging limply behind him. Reaching the drain, he carefully slid himself in right shoulder first, tucking his useless arm behind him to keep it out of the way. As he crawled, he focused less on his sight and more on his hearing and sense of smell. The mansion was mostly quiet, a few guards wandering here and there but nothing he couldn't simply slip by. He was grateful for the lessons Zabuza had given him on honing his senses, as right now they were more vital than ever. As he trailed along, he was thankful for the fact that the water wasn't from sewerage or something of a similar sort. The water was clear for the most part, probably drainage from taps or refrigerators. A patch of light ahead drew Naruto's focus back from his hearing, and he was surprised at what sat in the dank light. A fox was clawing at the grates above it in a small, square drain that was easily big enough for Naruto to crouch normally in. Its fur was a strange color, being reddish-gray with silver undertones and a triangular patch of white under its chin. Its thick bushy tail swayed behind it in apparent annoyance at not being able to get through the grate. Naruto made to crawl forward a bit more when its head snapped around to face him, an almost inquisitive look in its dark eyes. Naruto grinned through clenched teeth and held out his hand towards the small critter, hoping it wasn't rabid. The fox carefully padded forward, its front paw touching the pipe around Naruto's hand a few times before it came close enough to sniff it. Naruto had to hold back a childish giggle when its whiskers tickled his hand, and tickled its chin in return with the tips of his two fingers. The fox bounded forward and licked Naruto's face before baring its teeth in what Naruto assumed to be a smile of some kind. What an odd fox. I didn't even know they could smile, the blonde thought. Naruto pushed against the fox until it moved back so Naruto could crawl into the drained space, crouching on his hindquarters similar to how the fox was sitting. He could feel the pain coming back to him now that he was focused again. Zoning out and listening to the mansion had numbed his mind from the pain for a while. He focused on his hearing one more time and heard no one in the room above him, and pushed the grate up with one hand. Crawling through the now open hole in the floor, Naruto looked around and recognized the room as a storage room. On one side were fridges and giant freezers, on the other barrels and shelves of God knows what. The fox jumped up from the drain and jumped around the blonde for a minute before racing off to the nearest open source of food. Naruto shook his head in amusement before setting about relocating his shoulder. Letting it hang by his side, he relaxed for a few moments and was glad for his high pain threshold. If it wasn't for that, reducing his shoulder would take a lot longer than he would have liked. Once he was sufficiently relaxed, he lifted his arm up and out slowly until it above shoulder level, and reached behind his head as if he was going to scratch the back of his neck. Instead of stopping, he continued to reach for his other shoulder until the pain suddenly disappeared from his shoulder. Much better, he whispered to the fox, which stopped its eating long enough to yip quietly at him. Naruto chuckled before moving towards the door, listening for anyone on the other side before cracking it open just a bit. It was a massive kitchen. This was definitely more of a castle than anything else. And technically, he owned all of it. He opened the door enough to just fit and went through, darting along the cement-tiled floor. Right. Need to find information. Where would that slime ball keep his files? I wish I had a map of this place. Hang on. Quickly making his cross-shaped hand seal, Naruto called up a small group of 5 shadow clones. The clones, already knowing their orders, disappeared through the kitchen doors. Naruto strained his hearing to try and locate his clones, and when he couldn't, he grinned in triumph. The fox came out from the storeroom and sniffed around the kitchen for a minute before nipping at Naruto's ankles a couple of times. What is it? Naruto asked the fox, bending down to face it. Normally animals hated him, but this little fox seemed to love him. The fox yipped a few times before pointing its long nose towards the door, its wet black nostrils flaring as if it had picked up a scent. Naruto frowned in confusion before focusing his own sense of smell towards where the fox seemed to be looking. Picking up nothing but the musky scent of the fox, Naruto easily crept forward towards the door and pressed against it, looking out through the gap his clones had left. Seeing nothing, he moved to go back to the fox when he heard footsteps. They aren't in the dining hall yet, whoever it is must still be out in the hallways patrolling. But they are definitely coming this way. Damn. Naruto looked around the room, trying to find a good hiding spot when the fox yipped again. Naruto glared at the animal and it ran back into the storeroom. Looking around again, he resigned himself to hanging from the roof via his chakra. He waited just above the doorway, looking a bit like a vampire. Sure enough, a lone man walked into the kitchen. Dressed in a pair of green baggy pants that fell to halfway down his shins and a brown open vest, one could easily tell he was a gangster. Well, the clothes plus the tattoos down his arms of koi fish and dragons. The man scratched his stomach and snorted a few times as he walked, his bare feet slapping against the floor rather loudly. Naruto shook his head in disgust and stalked the man into the storeroom, being sure to make no noise. The gangster had pried open a barrel of sake and was refilling his small ceramic bottle with the alcoholic liquid. Creeping forward, Naruto cursed when he saw the grate was still pushed open. He was also surprised that the gangster hadn't seen it. The blonde made an attempt to quietly shut it, but the gangster had turned around. Oi, you're not supposed to be, air. The thug slurred. Yeah well, Naruto started, I go a lot of places I'm not supposed to. With that, Naruto dashed forward and brought his fist in close to his chest. Just as he got in range of the man, he placed his open hand on his fist and attacked, aiming an elbow strike to the gangster's chest. Surprisingly, the gangster managed to dodge it. The half-drunk fumbled with a knife tucked into his waistband. Naruto spun on his heel, throwing a backhand at the side of the gangster's head. The attack struck true and the man toppled to the ground, out cold. How pathetic, Naruto whispered to himself. Picking up the bottle of sake the man had dropped, Naruto sloshed it around his chest and chin, then dropped the now 3/4 empty bottle next to the fallen man's outstretched hand. It was easy to frame someone to look like they were drunk, especially when they were already halfway there. All of a sudden, a rush of images came to Naruto's mind from one of his clones. It had found Gato's quarters just as a patrol was coming around the corner. It had dispelled itself before it got caught, but now Naruto had to go search the shipping magnate's room himself. Raising his hands into a ram seal, Naruto dispelled the other clones that were running about the mansion and immediately gained a pretty accurate readout of the place. Some of the clones had found file rooms as well. He'd go there first and then go check out Gato's room. Getting through the halls to the files was easy enough. The patrols were less and less frequent the further away from Gato's quarters he got, and the few he did come across he could easily bypass by walking on the roof. He collected files on personnel and Gato's less than legitimate dealings that the shipping magnate wasn't willing to leave at the office. Naruto could hardly believe that one man could be so deep in the underworld. Slave trading, weapons import and export, business deals with Yakuza, black market trading. This guy had his grubby little fingers in every honey jar. You really shouldn't be here, my little ninja friend. Naruto spun on his heel, his eyes locking onto whoever had spoken from behind him. Leaning lazily against a wall was a rather tall, slender man that could easily be mistaken for a woman. He had long, flowing white hair that was tied into a thick braid, which easily reached the small of his back. Dressed in loose-fitting blue and white robes, he was smiling almost serenely at Naruto. But what really drew the blonde's attention were his eyes. He had soft orange eyes which held an almost ethereal glow to them. Who are you? Naruto demanded. The man chuckled softly. I could ask you the same thing. After all, you are a foreign ninja infiltrating this place. I, on the other hand, was invited in. You should really take off your forehead protector before you go sneaking around. Naruto reached up and touched the cold steel of his forehead protector, before glaring at the man again. What do you want? Me. I just want to talk. This place is so utterly dull, after all, the man said. You want to talk? You can start with your name. I suppose you're right. It's rude to ask someone else's identity without first revealing yourself. I am Hanjinki Kazuki. And you are? Han. Hanjinki. He's one of the triplets. Shit. No one important, Naruto replied. Oh come now, Kazuki whined. Surely you have a name. At least let me hear it before you leave. Naruto froze. Leave? In what manner? Naruto gulped and he heard Kazuki laugh from behind him. You sure are an interesting one. Come on, tell me your name. That's all I want to know. Tell me your name and you can go. Naruto. My name is Naruto. Kazuki grinned. Well, it was a pleasure to meet you, Naruto-san. I hope we meet again in the future. Your mere presence seems to excite me more than anyone else on this island. I wonder why. Naruto made a weird sound from the back of his throat, somewhere between a laugh and choking, before taking off down the halls with the use of his Shunshin technique. Kazuki watched the spot where Naruto had been standing for a few moments before his grin became a soft smile. The next few days should be interesting. I wonder how well my brothers will fare against a demon host.